This is Battlefield 2042 during the alpha stage of development. This footage is from mid-2021 and the game was set to launch in just a short couple of months. The game exited its initial pre-production stage in August 2020, which means that DICE only had 1 year and 3 months to actually build the game. EA CEO Andrew Wilson claimed that the game was way ahead of where they needed to be, and on track for its earliest feature complete in franchise history. But he was flat out lying. While he was saying this, the game had only been in actual production just 6 months earlier. So this leaves us with a glaring question. What was going on during the development of Battlefield 2042? And why did the developers at DICE only have slightly over 1 year to build a AAA game? The conceptual phase of Battlefield 2042 started in late 2018. Development started poorly, with a significant number of senior figures leaving DICE after Battlefield 5's development. This left the Battlefield 2042 team with a critical lack of experienced leaders, and this is where all the problems in Battlefield 2042's development began to snowball. The reason why these key figures left was due to a lack of creative control within the Battlefield franchise. Nobody at DICE wanted to allocate resources to Battlefield 5's Battle Royale mode, but they were forced to do so by EA. As development of Battlefield 2042 started, the Battle Royale genre was grabbing the gaming industry by storm, no pun intended, and games like PUBG and Fortnite were cashing in massively. EA wanted a part of the massive Battle Royale pie. As Battlefield 2042 began development, Apex Legends was about to be released, which, as we now know, was EA's answer to getting a piece of the Battle Royale pie. But EA wanted multiple titles to be in the Battle Royale genre. So, going into Battlefield 2042, EA urged DICE to make Battlefield 2042 into a Battle Royale game, which is how development started. EA quite literally told DICE to just copy what's popular, and since the leaders at DICE were now gone, there was little room for any resistance. Battlefield 2042 would be conceptualized as a battle royale. While the team began forming ideas about how Battlefield in a battle royale setting would look like, it was time for the technical teams to begin updating the Frostbite engine. Up until Battlefield 2042, the engine hadn't received any major changes since the release of Battlefield 1. Battlefield 5 was built on a 2016 version of the engine. DICE had planned a 6-month upgrade to a newer version of the Frostbite engine while the rest of the team came up with ideas for the Battle Royale game. But there was one giant problem. The mass exodus of senior developers at DICE meant that there was hardly anybody left that knew the Frostbite engine and what needed to be updated. The majority of the technical staff who had spent 10 to 15 years building and maintaining Frostbite were no longer at the company. The remaining team, lacking deep expertise in the engine's older and newer versions, struggled immensely with the integration and stability of the upgrade. Like I said, the upgrade to the engine was time-gated to 6 months, but in reality, the upgrade took 18 months, consuming over half of the entire development cycle. By late 2019, Apex Legends had released and EA saw the massive potential with having dedicated specialists to play as in a Battle Royale game. The same story was happening at Activision and Call of Duty with their operators in Warzone. So, They thought it would be a good idea to make the next Battlefield title also rely on these specialists. And with governments increasingly cracking down on loot boxes, EA and DICE needed a new, sustainable, additional revenue stream. The specialist system tied to unique characters was specifically intended to fulfill this need through the sale of cosmetic items. So, in late 2019, traditional Battlefield classes were removed and the specialist system, where unique characters with specific gadgets that could freely use any weapon, was adopted. By early 2020, the traditional Battlefield game was now going to be a battle royale. The engine was in a severe condition with technical debt out of control, the game hadn't even entered production, and they were expected to solve all of this and push the product out by next year. The game still hadn't started production, and they were extremely behind schedule, but things were about to get much worse. But before I continue, if you're enjoying this video, please give it a like and subscribe to this channel. Both are free and help me make more content just like this. When the majority of the Battlefield 2042 team transitioned to working from home in March of 2020 due to the pandemic, it compounded the existing Frostbite engine issues and significantly reduced the amount of effective development time. Developers needed to download an entire new build of the game daily to continue progress. In the office, this took minutes. At home, using a VPN and a wireless internet connection, this process often took several hours. Just 1 month after the work from home mandate was initialized for DICE, in April of 2020, EA decided to completely alter the game's direction. The game would no longer be a battle royale, but had to be a classic Battlefield experience with the concept of the battle royale going into a secondary mode, which we now know as Hazard Zone. The success of Call of Duty Warzone prompted EA to demand that Battlefield pivot its focus. The company decided the game should compete directly with the Warzone model by offering a large-scale, traditional Battlefield experience instead of a Battle Royale experience. The game now had to have huge maps and 128 players. This was one of the largest pivots in not just the franchise's history, but also for the video game industry. This was a AAA game that now had to be built and shipped within 1 year, with the current state of the game still being in pre-production. By August of 2020, the game would finally reach post-production. The marker for advancing to post-production was that the game's concepts and ideas were sound, and now the actual game needed to be built. At this point, this left DICE with 1 year and 3 months for post-production, and as a reminder, the game had to release with 7 original maps and 6 remastered maps for their new Portal mode, and all of them had to be created within the next year. The game was going to be a disaster. The developers, designers, artists, and anybody who actually was working on the game knew it at this point. But one person didn't get the memo. Battlefield 2042's existence was officially revealed in an earnings call with the CEO of EA when he said this: "I can tell you now that the Battlefield team is doing an incredible job. They're way ahead of where they were in prior production cycles and on track for their earliest feature complete in franchise history. The team is focused and the game is ahead of our internal milestones." This was in February of 2021, and to play devil's advocate here a bit, Wilson thought that the game would be entering alpha in February, but the reality was that the game was nowhere close to this milestone. Internally at DICE, they optimistically were aiming for alpha in September, with the game launching in November. By the spring of 2021, the game's development was in full crisis mode, forcing DICE to admit they needed outside help to achieve a stable build. In March, DICE formally brought Criterion Games onto the project. This assistance was expected to improve development. However, due to the team's ongoing lack of experience with the new Frostbite engine, getting a stable build remained extremely difficult. At this point, the game was so incomplete that quality assurance teams were literally testing concept art and the internal trailer that had been created a year prior, rather than a playable game. The deadline was quickly approaching, and they needed to show off the game at this point since the marketing team had to push the title. In June of 2021, Battlefield 2042 was officially shown to the world with an entirely cinematic trailer, and then a gameplay trailer to follow up. These trailers had to be captured in such a way that it wouldn't show off all the problems that the game was facing at that moment in time. The map shown in the trailers, Orbital, had the most development time and was the most stable at this point in development. But the map being the most stable out of all of the maps didn't necessarily mean that the map was in a good spot. Right after the reveal trailer, the game's user interface was deemed to be in a critical status and was putting the entire project at risk. While the exact reasons weren't entirely clear, the UI problems were thought to be connected to the departure of several lead UI scripters shortly before the main issues emerged, forcing DICE to rely on an outside contractor, which is why we saw the game launch without a leaderboard. In August of 2021, DICE conducted a technical playtest for Battlefield 2042. The test was highly unstable and had horrible performance issues despite being on the Orbital map. EA knew that the game wouldn't be ready by the release target at this point, and they thankfully delayed it. Now, the teams finally had some time to iron out the kinks, right? Well, not really. EA only delayed the game by a couple of weeks. The delay was put on the engineering side of the game, as some necessary back-end work could not be completed in the original time frame. While some developers on the game wished for a delay of months to ensure a better release date, the actual delay granted by EA was only a couple of weeks. In October of 2021, DICE held the game's open beta. In reality though, it was more of an open alpha, but the game was coming no matter what in just 1 month, since EA wanted to hit the holiday sales. After the release of the game, it was pretty apparent that the game was not ready and should have never came out in the state that it did. Higher ups at EA were quick to point the blame to games releasing around the same time frame, like Halo Infinite during their post-mortem town hall meeting. In this meeting, the chief studio officer at EA put the blame on polish. He stated that Halo Infinite was a very polished title, whereas Battlefield 2042 contained bugs and wasn't as polished. After they failed to release a solid product, that was basically an EA video game instead of a DICE video game, the entire way that all teams worked on Battlefield would also be transformed going forward, with all of Battlefield's development teams being restructured to ensure a more streamlined development process. EA believed that the problems with Battlefield 2042 stemmed not from vision but execution, and that they needed to put in a new process of monitoring the game into place, which is where the creation of Battlefield Studios comes into play. EA immediately restructured everything going into the next Battlefield game after the disaster of Battlefield 2042. While Battlefield 2042 was an expensive failure for EA, It really did lay the groundworks for the success of the next entry. I made a video on the development of Battlefield 6, which picks up this story directly after this point. If you're interested in following where EA took Battlefield next, and how Battlefield 6 was built, I strongly recommend giving the next chapter of this story a watch. I'll have it linked down below right next to the like button. And as always, thank you for watching and stay tuned for the next episode.